The photograph slid from a torn envelope during the morning search, and the German officer changed before the guard even touched it, knocking over the table, shoving two men aside, and diving across the floor with both hands reaching for the picture. When the guard lifted it into the light, every prisoner nearby went silent, because the officer was not afraid of being seen in the photograph, but of the man standing beside him. Sergeant Frank Wallace had searched hundreds of German prisoners since the camp opened, but Captain Otto Kruger was the first officer who watched a sealed envelope more carefully than he watched the rifles around him. The envelope had been found inside the lining of his coat during morning processing, tucked so flat beneath the cloth that the first guard nearly missed it. Kruger claimed it contained family photographs and asked that it be returned after inspection, yet his voice tightened every time Wallace turned the envelope in his hand. Wallace placed the envelope on the table and cut the edge with a field knife while two guards sorted the rest of Kruger's property. A folded letter came out first, then a postcard, then a cracked photograph that slipped from the paper sleeve and landed face down beside a tray of identification tags. Kruger moved before anyone read a word. He drove his shoulder into the table, scattered the trays across the floor, and threw himself toward the photograph with a panic no officer could hide. The guards grabbed him by the arms, but Kruger kicked hard enough to drag one man across the dirt. Wallace snatched the photograph from the floor and stepped back before the officer could crush it. The picture showed 5 men standing beside a farmhouse wall, 3 in German uniform, 1 in civilian clothing, and 1 with his face partly turned away. Kruger was in the picture, but he was not the man he had tried to hide. A young German prisoner in the next line saw the image and immediately lowered his head. Wallace noticed the reaction and ordered the prisoner pulled aside. Kruger shouted that the photograph was private family property, then demanded that no enlisted prisoner be allowed to look at an officer's belongings. The protest sounded formal, but his eyes kept moving toward the young man, whose name on the intake card was Lucas Meyer. Wallace handed the photograph to the camp interpreter and asked Lucas if he knew the farmhouse. Lucas hesitated, then pointed to the stone wall behind the men and said it stood outside a village where prisoners had been held for one night during the retreat. He also said the civilian in the photograph was not a farmer, as Kruger claimed, but a courier who carried lists between German officers after the official transport records had collapsed. Kruger lunged again, not at Wallace this time, but toward Lucas. The guards forced him back, and the movement broke whatever calm remained in the processing yard. Other prisoners began whispering, some stepping away from Lucas, others looking toward the barracks as if the photograph had opened a danger already waiting inside the camp. Wallace ordered Kruger separated and moved Lucas behind the guard table before the line could turn against him. The initial conflict sharpened when Wallace turned the photograph over and found a number written in pencil along the lower edge. It matched no prisoner tag, no truck manifest, and no property number in the intake file, but the camp records clerk recognized the format from missing transfer cards that had been reported stolen 2 days earlier. Kruger stopped struggling when he heard that, which told Wallace the number mattered more than the faces. By noon, Wallace had the photograph sealed in a clear evidence sleeve, Kruger locked in a side room, and Lucas placed under protection near the office. The story could have ended as a hidden photograph, but a runner from the records hut arrived with news that changed everything. The same farmhouse number had appeared on 3 prisoner files marked as released, even though no receiving camp had ever confirmed their arrival. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. The escalation began with a search of Kruger's barrack, but Wallace refused to let the guards repeat the same mistakes that had almost lost the photograph. He ordered every object moved into the yard under watch, every blanket shaken over a clean sheet, and every boot placed in a separate row. Kruger watched from the side room window with his hands pressed against the sill, while Lucas stood near the office door and tried to identify any object linked to the farmhouse. Inside Kruger's footlocker, the guards found nothing dramatic at first, only shaving tools, spare socks, and a prayer card folded inside a cigarette tin. Wallace nearly moved on until Lucas pointed to the tin and said the brand label was wrong. A guard peeled the paper away and found a second photograph hidden beneath it, smaller than the first, showing the same farmhouse courtyard from another angle. In this image, two covered wagons stood beside the wall, and one wagon had a chalk mark matching the number on the first photograph. Kruger demanded to know who had touched his things, and Wallace ordered him brought outside to answer in front of the evidence table. The officer claimed the photographs had been taken during a routine evacuation and said the wagons carried wounded men, but Lucas immediately contradicted him. He said the wagons had been used to separate prisoners whose names had already been removed from transport lists, which meant the photograph showed a place where paperwork and people stopped matching. Wallace sent two MPs to the records hut and ordered every file with the farmhouse number pulled. The records clerk returned with 5 cards, each one altered in a different hand. One prisoner had been marked released, another transferred, another sick, and 2 listed under spelling variations so slight that a tired clerk would never notice. The escalation moved from one photograph to a pattern of names being broken apart until no one could follow them. Kruger changed tactics. He said Lucas had invented the story because he hated officers, then accused Wallace of trusting a frightened prisoner over a commissioned man. Wallace answered by placing both photographs side by side and asking why the same civilian courier appeared in each image beside different wagons on different days. Kruger said nothing for several seconds, and those seconds turned the surrounding prisoners into witnesses. A third clue appeared when a cookhouse worker quietly approached the guard table and placed a folded scrap of photo paper near Wallace's elbow. He said it had been swept from the floor near the washroom after Kruger arrived. The fragment showed only a sleeve, a hand, and the corner of a document bag, but the hand wore a ring Lucas recognized from the civilian courier. The courier had not been passing through once. He had been moving documents in and out of the camp system repeatedly. Wallace ordered the washroom searched, and the guards found a drain cover loosened with a spoon handle. Beneath it sat a waxed packet containing 3 more photo fragments, each torn from a larger print. When assembled on the table, the fragments revealed a truck license plate, the farmhouse gate, and the shoulder of an American uniform partly visible behind one wagon. The room fell quiet because no American had been listed at that farmhouse. The escalation ended with Kruger trying to destroy the evidence without touching it. He shouted that the photograph proved nothing, but the shout triggered 2 prisoners near the fence to move at once, one toward Lucas and one toward the evidence table. The guards intercepted both men, and Wallace realized Kruger still had followers willing to act in the open. The photograph had become dangerous because it pointed to missing men, altered records, and a courier network still active inside the camp. The major consequence arrived when the American uniform in the photo fragment was identified by a medic from the rail intake station. The sleeve belonged to Lieutenant Andrew Carter, an American prisoner last seen wounded but alive during a chaotic transfer through the same region. His name had never appeared on the German camp roster, yet the photograph showed he had reached the farmhouse alive, standing behind a wagon that Kruger claimed carried only German wounded. Wallace ordered a full reconstruction of the image using the recovered fragments, then sent copies of the license plate and farmhouse wall pattern to nearby intelligence units. While the message went out, he moved Lucas to the infirmary underguard because the young prisoner had begun receiving silent threats from men who passed too close to his cot. The first note found beneath his blanket carried no words, only a small drawing of a torn photograph. The consequence widened when a truck driver in the American motor pool recognized the license plate from a captured vehicle stored behind a repair shed. The truck had been logged as empty when seized, but its rear floorboards had been recently replaced. Wallace ordered the boards lifted, and beneath them the guards found a narrow compartment lined with straw, large enough to carry papers, small equipment, or a man folded painfully out of sight. Kruger was brought to the repair shed and forced to look at the compartment. He refused to answer, but the civilian courier's ring appeared again, scratched into the wood beside a date. Lucas explained that the courier used marks instead of signatures, because transport documents could be seized, but carved symbols were harder to notice. The truck had not only visited the farmhouse, it had been part of the movement system. A runner returned from intelligence with confirmation that the farmhouse had been searched after the German retreat, but the search team found only empty rooms and fresh ashes in the stove. Wallace sent guards to recheck every ash sack taken from captured vehicles, and in one sack they found curled pieces of photographic paper that had survived the fire. One piece showed Carter's face clearly enough for the medic to identify him. The consequence became personal for the American guards when Carter's name was read aloud in the office. Several men had believed he died on the road weeks earlier, and now the photograph proved someone had hidden his survival long enough to erase him from official movement. Wallace ordered Kruger's followers isolated, not as punishment, but because any one of them might carry the next fragment or warning. That afternoon, Lucas revealed why Kruger feared the photograph so badly. The image did not only show Kruger at the farmhouse. It showed him beside the civilian courier on the day a group of prisoners vanished from the transfer line, and if the full photograph survived, it could prove he had directed the separation himself. Wallace asked where the complete print might be, and Lucas pointed toward the camp mailroom. The mailroom search produced the consequence Kruger had tried to prevent. Inside a parcel of blank envelopes, the guards found the missing half of the original photograph. The full image showed Carter standing alive beside two other prisoners, with Kruger looking directly toward the camera and the civilian courier holding the transport bag. The photograph no longer suggested a hidden route. It proved the route had passed through Kruger's hands. The major reversal began when the civilian courier was captured at the outer gate that evening, disguised as a supply clerk with a clipboard, a crate label, and a satchel of outgoing mail. Wallace expected him to deny knowing Kruger, but the courier smiled at the evidence table and said the photograph had not been taken by a witness trying to expose them. It had been taken by Kruger himself, as proof for a payment that never arrived. That changed the meaning of everything. Kruger had not risked everything to destroy the photograph because it was enemy evidence accidentally caught on film. He had created the proof, kept it hidden, and later tried to erase it when the same proof became dangerous. Wallace placed the full image in front of him and watched the officer's face lose the last trace of authority. The courier then revealed the second reversal. Lieutenant Carter had not been the only American moved through the farmhouse, and he had not been the most important prisoner in the photograph. One of the other men, half turned near the wagon, was a captured signals officer who had memorized German radio codes before the retreat. Kruger's group had not been hiding prisoners at random. They had been moving valuable witnesses outside normal records. Wallace ordered the courier searched again, and the satchel yielded 3 fresh envelope labels addressed to different camps under false prisoner names. The labels matched the altered spelling pattern from the record's hut. If the courier had passed through the gate successfully, the final trail would have split across multiple camps by morning. The photograph had exposed the old route, but the mail satchel revealed the next one. The reversal forced Wallace to stop searching backward and start moving forward. He allowed one false envelope to continue under surveillance, carried by an American runner posing as a routine clerk. The envelope was taken to the rail shed, placed in a sorting box, and collected by a prisoner orderly who had never been linked to Kruger. Guards followed him through the laundry yard and watched him slide the envelope into the handle of a broken broom. When the broom was recovered, a rolled film strip was hidden inside the hollow handle. It contained contact prints of several prisoners photographed against the same farmhouse wall. Some were German witnesses, some were Allied prisoners, and one was a civilian woman holding a ledger. Lucas identified her as the farmhouse owner, the person who had recorded names before the courier removed the prisoners from official routes. The reversal became complete when the farmhouse owner was located in a nearby displaced persons camp and brought to identify the images. She arrived with a burned ledger cover and a memory of names the paper no longer held. She pointed to Kruger in the photograph and said he had ordered the prisoners separated by value, not condition, while the courier handled the paperwork that made them vanish. Kruger's attempt to destroy the photograph had now produced more evidence than the photograph alone ever could. The full print, the mail labels, the hidden film strip, the courier, the altered cards, and the farmhouse witness all pointed in the same direction. The officer who had tried to erase one image had accidentally led the guards to an entire chain of records he never meant them to find. The final irreversible event began with a public evidence review inside the camp yard, where Wallace placed the full photograph at the center of a long table and arranged every recovered fragment around it in the order they had been found. The prisoners were not allowed to crowd the table, but they were marched past it in groups so each witness could see that the image had survived Kruger's attempt to destroy it. Kruger was brought out last, no longer carrying the confidence he had shown at processing. The courier stood beside him under guard. The farmhouse owner sat near the interpreter, and Lucas waited behind the American table with his statement already signed. Wallace did not ask Kruger to confess. He asked him to identify himself in the photograph, then asked him to identify the transport bag, the wagon, the courier, and the American officer standing behind the wall. Kruger refused every question until the farmhouse owner spoke. She did not accuse him with anger. She described where each man stood, where the wagons turned, where the ledger was kept, and how the courier collected names before the prisoners were divided. Her memory placed the photograph in motion, turning a frozen image into a sequence every officer in the yard could follow. The final danger came when the prisoner orderly from the laundry yard tried to seize the film strip during the review. He reached the table by pretending to stumble, but Lucas knocked the evidence sleeve away from his hand before Wallace even moved. Guards grabbed the orderly and found a matchbook in his sleeve, proving the plan had not been theft. It had been a last attempt to burn the film before the record was copied. Wallace ordered the photographic evidence duplicated immediately. A field photographer set up beside the table and made copies of the full print, the fragments, and every contact image from the film strip. The negatives were sealed in separate packets, one for Camp Command, one for Regional Intelligence, and one for the Missing Personnel Office. Kruger's greatest mistake was now beyond the reach of one hand, one match, or one torn envelope. The full list of names from the farmhouse owner was then compared with the altered transport cards. 3 men were confirmed alive in later sightings, 2 were still missing, and Carter's status changed from presumed dead to unconfirmed prisoner transfer. That change mattered because it reopened searches that had been closed. A single photograph had moved men back from disappearance into investigation. Kruger's final collapse came quietly. He asked to see the picture one more time, and Wallace allowed it under guard. The officer looked not at his own face, but at the man beside him, the signals prisoner he had hoped the guards would never identify. Wallace saw the truth in that glance. The photograph was not dangerous because Kruger appeared in it. It was dangerous because it proved whom he had chosen to remove from the record. By sunset, Kruger and the courier were moved to separate confinement. The orderly was removed from camp work, and Lucas was placed under protected witness status. The final irreversible event was not a punishment in the yard. It was the copying of the photograph into official evidence, where every face, wagon, wall, and number could be checked again and again until no one could pretend the picture had never existed. The photograph was sealed after dark, but Wallace left one copy pinned beneath glass in the records office until every name connected to it had been written into a new file. Lucas stood in the doorway as the clerk corrected Carter's status by hand, and Kruger was led past the window without being allowed to look away. He had risked everything to destroy one image, yet the moment he lunged for it, he made the whole camp ask why it mattered. That question kept the photograph alive. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WWII stories.